Hello, and welcome back to How to Tickle Yourself. I'm your host, Duff McDonald. My regular co-host, Matt McButter, will rejoin us next week. I could not be more excited about today's guest. His name is Debashish Banerji. He is the Haridas Chowdhury Professor of Indian Philosophies and Cultures and the Doshi Professor of Asian Art at the California Institute of Integral Studies, where he is also the program chair for the East-West Psychology Department. His interests lie in postmodern, post-colonial, and cross-cultural approaches to Indian philosophy, psychology, and culture. In addition to the stuff we're going to talk about today, Banerjee has curated close to 15 exhibitions of Indian and Japanese art. He has authored and edited several books, more than a few of which are about the topic of today's podcast, the spiritual thinker Sri Aurobindo. The most recent of those are Integral Yoga Psychology, Metaphysics and Transformation as Taught by Sri Aurobindo, which was published in 2020, and Meditations on the Isha Upanishad, Tracing the Philosophical Vision of Sri Aurobindo from 2019. I have read the latter book, and I have also read another one of his books, 7 Quartets of Becoming, a transformative yoga psychology based on the diaries of Sri Aurobindo. Listeners will know that I have mentioned Sri Aurobindo in almost every episode of this podcast. The reason for that is that the Indian philosopher, yogi, poet, journalist, and nationalist is one of the most profound thinkers I have ever come across in my life, and I'm going to guess in all of human history. Whatever your topic, whatever the conversation, it is very likely that Sri Aurobindo has had something insightful to say about it. But I've barely scratched the surface of his philosophy, much less gotten anywhere near the heart of his spiritual practice, integral yoga. I've wanted to do a Sri Aurobindo episode since I started this program, but I've never felt up to the task of articulating what it is about Aurobindo that makes him such a singular spiritual force. But Debashish should have no such trouble. So it's time I stop talking and let this wonderful man explain to both you and me at least a little piece of the sublime glory of Sri Aurobindo and his legacy. Welcome to the program, Debashish. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Duff. It's wonderful talking to you.
At the present moment, traveling town to town, the mystery of the motion, right here, right now. Right here, right now. Whoa, right here, right now.
So, I gave listeners your bio, but, to get into Sri Aurobindo, I was thinking maybe the best way to start the conversation might be to have you talk about how you discovered him yourself, what that did to your life in terms of direction, and then the prize-winning question, how you would summarize, if possible, what he represents.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Duff. These are really big questions. I don't know if I'll do justice to them, but I'll make an attempt. So the first question relating to how I came across Sri Aurobindo, that's the question, right? How I came across Sri Aurobindo?
Yeah.
Right. So I grew up in India. I was part of the middle class, going to school and sort of being herded into a life future. In India, if you're conditioned by society to try and do good in your studies so that you may become a doctor or an engineer. So these are the sort of life choices that you're being propel towards without knowing anything else about life. So I found myself in an engineering school. And within the very first year, I didn't know why I was there. So this pushed me into a big existential crisis, not only regarding why I was not there, but why I would be pushed into that kind of a world or choice, and what it was in this time and in this situation that created the circumstances for people to be pushed into certain types of life choices. So I engaged with those questions without any answers, without anybody to give me answers. And it's only at a certain point of time that I stumbled across the work of Sri Aurobindo. And I found that a lot of my questions were answered. So I'd say the answers to my questions were not just answers that were satisfied by talking about society, but they were also not just satisfied by talking about spirituality that takes us out of society. So that was what appealed to me in the fact that Sri Aurobindo was able to give answers that contextualized life, society, and our time, what we may call modernity, in a way that actually made sense and that allowed me to start my life in a satisfying way to myself.
And I gather from our previous conversation that that resulted in a complete change of direction.
That did. So I left the engineering school I was in. I tried to look for direction, as it were, from within. Sri Aurobindo, the primary teaching of Sri Aurobindo is that you can turn to other sources of wisdom that are inside yourself. They're always there. Everybody has them, but they don't access them because we are told by the world around us that we have to depend on others, books, expertise, various kinds of crutches. But once one starts developing the certain faith in the power of one's own inner judgment, one's contact with truth inside one, life starts unfolding in a new way. So I did try, as it were, to listen to a voice within. It wasn't easy. I didn't have the equipment to do it to start with. But even just the trying opens up a path. And it's as if you start getting some kind of a answer, both from outside and from inside, that prepares you. And as it prepares you, you start becoming more aware of that guidance that is really also transforming you at the same time.
When we spoke a few weeks ago, I told you a little bit about my experience of writing Tickled, and one of the things that hit me out of the blue is very much akin to what you were just saying. I suddenly noticed that we had become a culture dependent on experts, and everyone wanted an expert to tell them what to do. And particularly in COVID, people were scared and were looking for an answer from outside. And I had a distinct experience here in Hurley with my wife where I was like, I know what I need to do right now. And so I definitely experienced a little bit of that shift for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with you, Duff. Actually, if I may, what you raised is so profound because, we are conditioned by society, by the various forces that are making our world. But at the same time, we can make another kind of world. And that imperative, that pressure, is what is inside us. It's actually coming from sources that are universal. And I'd like to make a difference there between what you said And there's an entire school called positive thinking, which says that I can use my thought to manifest whatever I want. And that already is a step away from I have to listen to experts and do whatever they tell me. But there's a difference, because what you're talking about and what I'm talking about has to do with much greater, deeper sources that make themselves known to us. It's not just something that I decide with my mind. I want a Mercedes Benz, or I want a better job, or something like that. There is, to that imperative that you're talking about, I know what to do, something much deeper, something that is connected with the very destiny of the earth, that is taking us into itself.
Exactly. It's the thing I was talking about too. It was more a sense of knowing than having arrived at the end of some intellectual process.
Right.
And a lot during the writing of Tickled, I sort of had this experience where it was kind of startling to suddenly be in receipt of a point of view or an understanding that I hadn't been mulling over, that was suddenly just sort of arrived.
Right.
On a related note, like to get us back to Aurobindo, one of my favorite things in his teachings, and it's almost impossible to make a list, because every single thing he writes is somehow thrilling, is the distinction he wants to teach us about the distinction between knowledge and ignorance.
Right.
And the Sanskrit terms vidya and avidya.
Yes.
And you go into this in depth in your Isha book. But just to get you going, from my understanding, knowledge in this context means knowledge of the one, the underlying unity of all things.
Yes.
Ignorance is the state in which you don't have access to that understanding. Can we talk a little bit about knowledge and ignorance, and sort of what in context of Aurobindo's thinking?
Yes, absolutely, Duff. So the term, as you said, vidya and avidya, knowledge and ignorance. Knowledge, it's really interesting. We think knowledge is what we acquire through reading, going to school. It relates to what you're talking about, experts and expertise. Knowledge, in the sense that the Upanishads use that term, and Sri Aurobindo is following that understanding, means knowledge by identity. In other words, the only thing that we really know is what we experience, and we can know it by experience. And if we really think about it, the only thing that we know by experience is ourselves. It's the one question that you can be asked that you don't really have an answer to. That question is, how do you know that you exist?
Mm-hmm.
You know that you exist. You cannot give an answer to it, because you cannot describe how you know that you exist.
Mm-hmm.
This is vidya. This is knowledge with a capital K. Think of the fact that if that was extended in the same way that you know that you exist, you know the existence of other things in the world. That would be vidya. Now, how we know things in the world, on the other hand, is through a fabrication of our senses. I infer that you exist. I don't know that you exist. I form a sensory picture of your existence, and my mind says, this must exist. And that's something that quantum physics is talking about now, which is that the material world is really a kind of a probabilistic appearance. And so when we're talking about ignorance is coming from the fact that the way we experience things, we experience it with ourselves as the center of the universe and as the only thing that has real kind of truth to it. Everything else is an inference. But knowledge is where everything is known the same way as we know ourselves, known by identity, known because I am that. I am you. So I know you from within, not by looking at you from the outside.
Right, right. And I also I make the point in Tickle too that and you addressed it, I think, in Seven Quartets, at least peripherally. As a business writer, I've spent my whole life looking at numbers and quantifications, and it occurs to me now that our obsession with counting or measuring, which is in its nature a division, prevents us from being able to access this sense of oneness that you're talking about. And that one of the and you know, in particularly in COVID, right, it was a measurement orgy, and our attempts to reduce things by quantifying lead us away from that true self. Did I read that right in your book, that you sort of see that the same way?
Absolutely. Yes, Duff. So because the quantification is really an index of our sensory perception. Right. All that we're doing is we're trying to take our senses that we're so proud of, the fact that we've extended our senses. We have machines to, count things and, look at the stars, and you survey huge numbers of people and all that sort of thing. And we develop what we call knowledge, information, data, and we call that knowledge. So it's really interesting to look from a cultural point of view, and then from Sri Aurobindo's point of view, at the fact that all that is just dismissed at a single go and called ignorance. Mm-hmm. All that is ignorance. And it's important that ploy is really important for us to begin to perceive what is true knowledge. Once one realizes that's all ignorance, then one opens up to the fact that one can know directly from within. And that becomes the aim of life. The aim of life is not to be stuck in what we think is knowledge. We can't go very far. All we do is gather information and make inferences. It's all speculation, and it's this, as you said, quantified understanding posing as something real, something that we can grasp. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, once one does this, once one can put one's mind to it, one focuses one's attention on this division. This is ignorance and this is knowledge. It launches one into a search that ends up with another kind of understanding. And that's the understanding of the oneness of all things that you are, that you know by identity.
You mentioned the mind there, and something that it's not particular to him, but that he stresses a lot is to what you were just saying, is the importance of transcending the mind. And I know that my mother is listening right now, and I wonder how you would explain to her what that means. What does it mean to transcend the mind, and why is that so important to this understanding of the true nature of reality?
Yes, Duff. So, when we use the word mind, sometimes we use it very loosely. We use it to mean what I call the subjective self. Anything that we experience is experienced by the mind. That's a very loose use of the word mind. The mind, as even philosophers use it in the West, but certainly as the Indian philosophical traditions, yoga traditions use it, is the organ of perception and inference from the senses and the use of logic. So the interesting thing here is that I mean, again, if you think of things like quantum physics, they are coming to the same conclusion, that there is a sort of creation of reality that is going on by our minds that is logical. It's logical. The primary, sort of property of the mind is to put everything into boxes. I if I mean, it starts with ourselves. If I am, as I said, I have a sense of reality. If I am real, everything else is only secondarily real. If I put my focus on a certain idea, all other ideas are either unreal or secondarily real. See, so the mind uses logic to create divisions and create classifications in which everything has a distinct place. And in doing that, we fail to find that which is the one within all of that. So only if the mind's, mechanism can somehow be stopped, we can find consciousness. Mind is a certain kind of consciousness, consciousness that has kind of formulated itself into a certain type of machine. But if we can undo that, we find pure consciousness. We find that which is the same everywhere. So that's the idea of transcending the mind.
And the toughest part about it is you need to use the mind to transcend the mind.
Right, because you're stuck in it, right? I mean, it's a funny kind of puzzle, like the way you put it, Duff. It's like wrestling with oneself, right? It's like find one arm wrestling the other. But that's true, because in a way, I mean, that's what we're talking about, even in making this kind of a distinction between knowledge and ignorance. It's using the mind. We're telling the mind, you have to look at things in another way. And once one looks at it in a certain way, then gradually the mind cedes to something greater than itself. It collapses in a way. So this is what's called jnana yoga, the yoga of knowledge, which is the application of the mind to arrive at that which is beyond the mind.
I had a moment in early quarantine where I said to my wife, out of the blue, everything I thought I knew was wrong. And it was obviously a startling feeling. It wasn't as scary as it could have been, but essentially, I felt at the time all my own opinions just sort of receding a little bit, and something else moved to the forefront. And my best word for it was a tickle. And I found that I was waking up and being in a state of presence where everything that happened was wonderful. The meal we were eating, I would say it's the best one we've ever had. The book I was reading, I'd say, I even have a chapter in the book called The Best Book I Ever Read, because I found that I was saying that to her book after book after book. And at first, there was a moment where I said, what's happened to me? Have I lost all my standards? And then it sort of dawned on me that what was happening was I was experiencing a kind of delight in what I was doing and what was happening to me. And that brings me to, there's a passage from your Isha book about delight. And you wrote, delight is at the basis of things, and the very meaning of existence is the enjoyment of delight. This is what we are here for, but one must know how to enjoy. Wrongful enjoyment brings only suffering. So delight, obviously, what takes us to the concept of ananda and bliss, But can you tell me a little more about how delight is at the basis of things?
Yeah, absolutely, Duff. And I'd like to, kind of talk about it from the viewpoint of what you just said, which is really beautiful and very profound. And it relates to all that we've been talking about so far. So what is happening there? I mean, both in the thing that you said about suddenly feeling that this is what I have to do, or feeling that everything that I've known is wrong. These moments, these sort of instants, one may say, these flashes are really something else in us, and you were not prepared for it. And this brings us to this. We were talking about methods and about using the mind to overcome the mind. So it's not, that's one method, but it's not the only method. The use of the mind to overcome the mind is to get us to a certain point where something else which already knows, which is the something that's telling you that all that you know is wrong. Or what is that? There's something inside you already there. You know, it's in the Indian tradition, they call it Jnata Purusha, the being of knowledge. The being of knowledge dwells in all of us. So once that starts speaking to you, I mean, the techniques of using the mind to quell the mind, meditation, to try and quiet the mind, it's all to get you to that point where that starts talking to you. And if that starts talking to you, you realize that you already are wise. You have wisdom. You have a touch of knowledge with capital K, of the one that's in all things. And this bliss that you're talking about, this delight that you're talking about. So this is the interesting thing. We could actually obliterate everything and know the one without a second. But that would actually take us out of the universe completely and make the universe meaningless. While actually, if the one is so vast, the one is totally infinite, it has no horizons. If it encounters its own otherness, what it experiences is bliss. It knows that this is me, and at the same time, this is not me, because this is so far away. I'm encountering an aspect of myself for the first time. And that encounter just opens up this wonder and bliss, all the time. So that's the deep relationality of the one. The deep relationality of the one is the very meaning of the word, rather than let's get rid of the world and get into a meditation in which nothing exists. Everything exists, but everything is the infinite one, the one reveling in its infinity.
So you've just brought up, for lack of a better term, what I'll call the mathematics of infinity. And I actually touched on this in Tickle too, where I said this is contrary to the math that we are taught in school. And Aurobindo has a whole bunch of great ways that he describes it, also borrowing from Upanishadic ways of describing it. Tell us about the mathematics of infinity.
Yeah, and that's at the heart of all this, because when you talk about Sri Aurobindo, the path of yoga, or the discipline, the spiritual discipline that he taught, he called it integral yoga. And the term integral, as he uses it, is really a translation of the Sanskrit term purna. Purna has other synonyms. Purna can mean full or whole. And it all rests on a certain verse from the Upanishads when we're talking about the Upanishads. And I want to mention that verse. It's from the earliest Upanishad, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, on which actually I've just completed a book. So the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad has the verse. It goes, Purnam adah Purnam idam Purnat Purnam udachyate Purnasya Purnyam adaya Purnam eva vashishyate. Now what it means is, let's translate it as the whole. rather than the integral. We could put the word integral there as well. That is the whole. This is the whole. Out of the whole emerges. If you subtract the whole from the whole, it's the whole that remains. So this is the mathematics of infinity. In other words, and it is literally the mathematics of infinity. Mathematicians who use infinity describe it like that. You can take as much as you want from it, but it still stays infinite. It doesn't lose a certain quantifiable amount.
Mm-hmm.
See? So this is the whole, the integral, because it is the integer. It's in everything, but it's unviolable. It's undividable, indivisible. It cannot be taken away. So on the front, we have this mathematics of the finite, objects, things, trajectories, all this kind of, discrete movements and objects. But underneath it, there is the indivisible one that has become each of these things. They have emerged from it and they are it. That is the mathematics of infinity.
And you can apply that to thinking about just yourself as a human being, right? Where you there are parts of you, whether they could be emotions or thoughts or something, that emerge at some time, and those may pass away, and yet you still remain the complete you that
Yes.
you were before and that you will always be. And so I guess that's kind of is it as above, so below? Like all these apply from a cosmic down to the personality, right?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. It's fractal and it's also layered at every level it applies. Sri Aurobindo is talking about 3 layers of emergence, one may say. A transcendental layer where we don't even know what that is. It's the radical infinity. And then out of that emerges what we call the cosmos. The cosmos is really an idea with a capital I. Oh, he uses the term real idea. It's not a mental idea. It's reality as idea. And that's what holds it together. That's why we try to find laws of the cosmos, because it's an idea.
Mm-hmm.
And that idea is a whole that emerges from the radical infinity. So it's, even in physics, they call it a bounded infinity.
Mm-hmm.
I think, yeah, Einstein uses the term bounded infinity. So this bounded infinity emerges out of the radical infinity. And it is made up of entities. Each of these entities is like a finite, but actually in itself, it is nothing but the radical infinity.
Right. Where all formations or surface formations of the one.
Right, exactly.
I guess in his words.
Surface formations of the one, which in their depth house the one. That's the Isha Upanishad, right? It begins with that line. All this is for the habitation of the Lord. Whatsoever moves in this moving universe. So that first line itself is telling you the Lord, it's not a feudal idea. He's not talking about a king. What he's talking about is the master of will. The will that runs the universe is in each of us.
And in terms of what we were saying before, trying to access this part of us. I was watching an interview on your website, and you pointed to one of the crucial parts of Aurobindo's yoga and our relationship to the divine. And you said the one thing necessary in this yoga is a spiritual yearning, and you said, "Ask, and it shall be given to you." And then even better, a few sentences later, you said, "To know what it is that we want is to receive what it is that we need." Can you explain what you're talking about there?
Thank you, Duff. Yeah, very, very true. I think what you've put your finger on is the very essence of spiritual growth or of any self-becoming, because we get stuck in method. You know, anybody is going to ask you, what should I do? Should I contort my body? Should I, meditate for a month nonstop? Or what should I do to escape from my everyday reality? And what we are actually being told is that it's already inside you, but you have to really ask for it. It's really a question of a deep will that you ask and you will receive. So this is the kind of relationality of the individual and the divine that is constantly evolving us in the world. Whatever we want in a deep sense, if we ask for from a transcendent source, it is given to us. And that's the secret method of all methods.
Speaking of methods, you are a wonderful articulator in your writing and speaking of the difference between what you might call traditional Western philosophy and Indian yoga, which makes use of subjective science to validate the views and experiences that yoga can give us. And so essentially, we're talking about experiments in consciousness. Once I stumbled on what that actually meant, and, it's Aurobindo's writings are basically, a 40-year attempt to describe that. Purely intellectual, philosophical, or otherwise pursuits suddenly stood out to me as suffering from a real poverty of insight. Because, as you said earlier, without experience, you can't really understand anything. But yoga is a science, right? So can you distinguish? We had a lot of time during COVID, everyone yelling about the science, the science, the science. That's a different thing, right? So can you sort of talk about for a sec what the science of yoga means and how that differs from sort of a typical Western view of scientific inquiry?
Yeah, sure, Duff. And you started with philosophy. And so I think we can talk about all these three things. You can talk about philosophy, science, and you talked about experiments of consciousness. It's a kind of experimental psychology, conducted by oneself, a sort of a self-transformative experimental psychology. And they are all related, so when we are talking about science, we are actually talking about finding the laws of the world, finding the laws of the world in which we live, the laws of what runs us, etc. But if we conduct experiments of consciousness, we also come up with certain types of laws. We understand how things are related in terms of consciousness. And we can put that down. And so what happens is that somebody who has arrived at a certain point, maybe from the scratch, maybe from what you were just discussing about ask and it shall be given unto you, becomes, an adept in understanding the way things happen in consciousness, and creates a science of consciousness. That science of consciousness is called a yoga. Now, a yoga doesn't just give us occult knowledge, that is, knowledge of how consciousness can move things from here to there, how telepathy can happen, etc. That's part of it. But it ultimately brings us to a knowledge, a deep knowledge, a knowledge with a capital K, that gives us a vision of the entire world. It gives us a vision of how the world is structured against the backdrop of something even greater than it. And that is a philosophy. So out of the experiments of consciousness are born sciences and philosophies. And now these sciences and philosophies can be used by those who want to get to those visions, those understandings, and those states of consciousness. So that's how they're related together. But at the bottom, at the base of it, it is exactly what you said, experiments of consciousness with a goal of becoming underneath them.
And I think this is quite related. One of my favorite ideas that you spend a lot of time elaborating on is two different perspectives of reality, the heliocentric and geocentric points of view. It occurs to me that the division between the two is arguably the veil of enlightenment in some way. But there's also you can also get at the whole issue of time. One is sort of a viewpoint from an eternal standpoint, and one is more in the passage of time. Can you talk about, just sort of explain those two things and how they fit into, I guess it was from the Isha book, but how they fit into the Aurobindo's philosophy as well?
Yes, absolutely. And it goes back to what you said about knowledge and ignorance. So you can even map these two to knowledge and ignorance with a capital K and a capital I. The heliocentric is really the viewpoint of the sun. So the Veda and even in the Upanishad, these are really very ancient Indo-European mythological systems. And the Indo-European mythos is a solar mythos. Even the whole Christian mythos, you could say, is a solar mythos. There's a mythology behind it. And according to that, we see that there is the realm of the sun. So, the day, the morning gives us a certain kind of an image of an everlasting day. We find this term, everlasting day, in theology as well. So the notion of the everlasting day is a word which is pervaded by solar light. The sun is everywhere. And from a certain point of view, it's literally true. We are just particles of the sun. The sun, as it were, has extended itself into fragments which are rotating around it or revolving around it, forming the solar system. So this viewpoint of the sun, where all it sees is itself, once and for all, that is vidya or knowledge or the heliocentric view. It only sees the one.
Is this what they mean by "I have seen the light"?
Yeah, the light that never changes, or the light that never, But when something is actually turning, see, this is the birth of darkness. The birth of darkness is not really a truth. It's a imposition of something against the light, causing something to become away from the light. See, so this appearance of duality makes the heliocentric into the geocentric. The geocentric is run by these dualisms. Day and night, we are seeing it all around us. The day and the night, the cycles of time, of the solar cycles of the seasons, moving from spring. It's like all these are metaphors of being born, living, and dying. At the psychological level, it's that. And all this is really the discretization of the continuous, or the discretization of the permanent, coming into particles. Again, when we're talking about each of us is separate from everybody else, it's the similar kind of idea. It's the pluralization of the single view of the sun. Okay, So this becomes the geocentric. And the difference between the two is that when you're stuck in the geocentric, you are run by these dualities, and they're painful. You are constantly trying to grab at the light, and you're being pulled away by the darkness. You're trying to grab at life. Freud is going to talk about eros and thanatos, right? There is a drive for eros, for the life principle. And on the other hand, what's pulling against it is the drive towards death all the time. This is going on in every moment of our lives. So this is the geocentric reality. Now, what the Upanishads are saying, what Sri Aurobindo is saying from the Upanishads, particularly or from the Veda, is that we're not here to deny either of them. We're here to see the heliocentric in the geocentric. That's the transformation of the geocentric. And how do you understand it? Now, think of this sometimes when you're at a really heightened state. You feel that you're not just doing things, but you live in a kind of an eternity in which what you're doing has already happened. Sometimes we call this deja vu. It's happened before. But this is a deja vu can be at a very high pitch where you get a sense that everything that's happening has already happened, but at the same time, it's happening for the first time right now. It's the confluence of the heliocentric and the geocentric that's taking place. You have a creative choice at this moment to do something because it's that which you're meant to do. You're feeling the complete, sort of energy of doing that. And that's the delight of the moment. At the same time, you're feeling that you live in eternity. This has always happened. So that's the way in which we can overcome the, division of the geocentric and the heliocentric. And in a way, we may say that's the very meaning of yoga. The very purpose of life is for us to live life like that.
And you might even say so we live in a dualistic perspective generally, right? There's me, us, and them, this and that. And I think what you're talking about is there are the moments that we all experience where those all collapse and you are simply at the center of your own existence and doing that. I guess, they say being in the flow, but it's as if all the issues have sort of collapsed into themselves and been reabsorbed into that heliocentric point of view. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's a simultaneity, because when you're talking about being in the flow, that is a certain kind of a movement into a spiritual state, I'd say. But this is a simultaneity in which you are most yourself, you are immediately present, and at the same time, you're sensing that the whole universe is with you. It's it's the oneness of all and the special uniqueness of yourself at that moment as one together.
So getting to the idea, just shifting gears a little, back to the idea of the Lord and the thing behind the thing, right? And that's it's obviously all through his writings, and most of the Upanishadic thinking too is trying to get at how you can sort of wrap your head around a thing that you cannot wrap your head around. And I was reading, I told you, the Kena Upanishad, his commentary on it. And I wanted to just read you a quote and see what your response to it is. By whom or what is the mind missioned and sent on its errand, so that it falls on its object like an arrow shot by a skillful archer at its predetermined mark, like a messenger, an envoy sent by his master to a fixed place for a fixed object? What is it within us or without us that sends forth the mind on its errand? What guides it to its object? What's he getting at there? What's the answer to his question?
So this is the beauty of it. This Upanishad called Kena Upanishad. Kena literally is a question. Kena means by what? And that's why it begins with that. By what mission? By what mission? In other words, the first thing that they're telling you, and this is related to the knowledge and ignorance reality, the first thing that they're telling you is what you're doing, you think you're thinking, but something is thinking you.
Right.
Right. What is it that's thinking you? So, just to engage with that question is first and foremost to dislocate your normal way of understanding things and to open you to the fact, no, something is thinking you. And if you engage with that question, that opens up the receptivity to something greater than you. And that in that Kena Upanishad, then they'll talk about the hearing of the hearing, the seeing of the seeing, the breathing of the breathing, the speech of the speech. So evidently there is, again, the heliocentric and the geocentric. There is a certain kind of one that has made itself into the many. Each of the many is a unique aspect of the one. We are all unique aspects of the one. But we are really, in a sense, embodying the one. So in forgetting that, they're telling you you're a mask. Recognize the fact that somebody's wearing you and become the one that's wearing you.
Which is basically, one of the things he talks about a lot too, is that we sort of have if you take a materialist point of view, you sort of have to make these giant leaps of imagination that a lump of flesh can somehow spontaneously create or house a mind on top of it, or a life or mind on top of it. And what Aurobindo stresses over and over and over again is that no, it couldn't really happen that way. It must be contained, involved in it, so that so we sort of have our hierarchy wrong. It's not a body that thinks, it's a thought that has a body. And once I grasped that, it made complete sense to me. It's like a sort of a Russian doll metaphor, right? And we just, because we're so consumed by our sensory inputs, we have the view backwards. We don't see that you should be doing what you just said and trying to figure out what the higher power is behind you that's coming through you. Why do you think that is so challenging for modern people to even contemplate?
Yeah, we've taken that turn. That's the whole idea of modernity. We've taken that turn. We talk about the Dark Ages, right? With the medieval period is the Dark Ages, when people believed in the church, and there were atrocities committed because the church becomes a certain kind of an imprisonment. It tries to control people. It tries to define what people ought to do, etc. So in the turn away from that, the question is, what can be considered universal to all of us? And we don't need to obey somebody from outside. And the easiest answer to that is matter. With our senses, we perceive the same world. So that must be the universal that we can accept. So that's the turn we took from around the 16th century, and we've created an entire world. So we've created a civilization, which is the European civilization, and then that has spread across the world, colonized the world, forced people, that's the white man's burden, to force people through education to think like others. You were talking about science. So science is great, but science is also, it's a religion. It's got its own assumptions to it. And we buy into that assumption because we think that we are all one. We are all universal. And our universality is based on that assumption. That's why it becomes so, you're defying, you have to have a lot of guts to defy what everybody believes. It's the hypnotism of our time that you're asking people to challenge in thinking in another way, in reversing, inverting the doll.
And you talk about this quite a bit in Seven Quartets, the sort of imprisoning aspect of a consumerist capitalist culture that is asking us to understand our existence in a certain way. What is the, what's the way out? What do we, these are, Aurobindo, when I first tried reading him, was completely impenetrable to me. I would read 2 sentences. I was like, I have no idea what this guy's even talking about. And I got to this point now where it's sort of hypnotic, but I know he can't be for everyone. And, speaking of universality, what is the way that we can, how to communicate some of these sort of ideas of the divine that people will even listen to? Like, are you on that mission? Is that, how do we do that?
I wouldn't call it a mission, Duff, but I would say that's what inspires my life, and hence I, convey that in whatever way I can, because that's the essence. It's what gives meaning to my life. But I think the answer to your question, as I understand it, is that you have to live it and you have to convey it to the people that come into your life in the language that they will understand. So it's a conversation. It's everything in life is really forms of exchanges of consciousness. I mean, whether it's by language or whether it's by telepathy, whether it's by direct transmission of consciousness, these are the various forms by which it has to be done to whatever extent it can be done in everybody's life. And we have to master different languages. In other words, I'm not just talking about different cultural languages. I'm talking about different forms of the English language. I mean, every individual, every class of individuals understands reality in a certain way that comes to them through a certain kind of language. And those languages have, they have closures and they have openings. So it's only when you, on the spot, in an improvised way, are able to open up those doors that you can find new kinds of experiences that people can become open to.
It's interesting you talk about our different languages. At early quarantine, that show came out on Netflix called Tiger King. And I was watching it with my wife. It's about these big cat owners. And in the first episode or so, I was like, the grammar and the logic of these people makes no sense. It's like a broken logic. And then another episode or 2 in, I noticed, I was like, but oh my God, they all understand each other. So it was a microcosm that for us looking from the outside, it's like, this is almost incomprehensible what you're saying to each other. But to them, you could see that it was clear as day, right? And it was a lesson for me, as a creature of the intellect for most of my life, that people speak different languages, even though they speak the same language. Right. And we do ourselves a disservice by dismissing something just because it doesn't sort of sync up with our own. I had another one or two things I wanted to read to you here before we go, because one of my favorite things is to read Sri Aurobindo to my wife. And just because, as you know, the writing is just otherworldly. He's talking here about the difference between becoming and being, and for the listener, just to go into it, becoming is the movement through time, and the being is sort of your eternal nature. But he's got a great couple sentences here where he says, what we become is a fluent mass of life, a stream of experience pouring through time, a flux of nature upon the crest of which our mentality rides. What we are is the eternal essence of that life, the immutable consciousness that bears the experience, the immortal substance of nature and mentality. That's geocentric, heliocentric, right? Is basically
absolutely yes, absolutely.
So it's a lot of it is like sort of, as you said, reorienting yourself or myself for my experience to sort of thinking about what's actually happening here, not in the sense of what did that person do to me or what do I, why am I frustrated with that, but sort of the if you are a mask, what are you a mask for? I love this idea that we're a stream of experience pouring through time. Right. And it basically changes your understanding of what you actually are. Right.
Absolutely.
Another one he said, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Life itself is a rhythm of God. I pulled it right out of context, but what do you think he's talking about there?
Yeah, really. I mean, so the rhythm, he's also talking about, the Sanskrit chandas. In other words, everything is actually made in terms of these cycles, these rhythms. They're interpenetrating. That's the idea when we are talking about the cosmos as an idea. The cosmos is an idea that emerges out of that, which is totally radically infinite. That idea is bound by rhythm. It's a single rhythm, one may say, that modulates into infinite rhythms that are interpenetrating in a harmonic. So, talk about the music of the spheres. It's basically that, that is referring to when we, and it sort of opens up a goal of becoming. Can we see the universe like that? Can we arrive at that perception of everything being interconnected in a single rhythm?
And one of their great metaphors for that too is waves on the ocean, right? It's like there are individual waves, but they are still part of the one thing, and the interaction of them is perfect. It doesn't break. The ocean doesn't fall apart when one wave hits another. It adjusts dynamically.
Right. Absolutely.
All right. I got one more for you here. So one of the things about Aurobindo that is most satisfying to me is the almost outrageous sense of optimism in his writing, right? We're constantly thinking that there's a crisis. The media is always telling us there's a crisis. We also sort of tend to get pulled into dualities and problematics instead of realizing that everything is actually as it should be. It's perfect. And the message he says, or he has for us, is that we can, it's the ball's in your court, right? And he says, man, first among nature's children, has shown the capacity to change himself by his own effort and the conscious aspiration to transcend. To me, that kind of sums it all up. And he basically, all his writing is trying to tell you how to do that.
Beautiful. Absolutely. That's almost like the central message of Sri Aurobindo. And and I think one of the things, what you said, he's basically saying that it is within our power to do it. If we look to that, then yes, we can change the world. We can really come to the most beautiful world that we can create. But, if you look at the last chapter of The Life Divine, he's also making a plea there, that there is a certain urgent note there. He's saying that given the circumstances of the world, it's easy to miss this point. And it's easy for us to actually go down the road to hell if we don't realize that this is really what we're here for. So I think there is something to be told about exactly what you said, to focus on that and to make it our own. And I think that's the real message of Sri Aurobindo.
Yeah, and it's like one of my takeaways is that given that sort of you have to focus on what's in your power to achieve, and so essentially that means focus on what's happening to you.
Yes.
And don't distract yourself by thoughts of other things. And if you can bring your awareness to it, you can hopefully end up starting to hear, as you said, that voice that is coming from a different place, that isn't just coming from the mind.
Yes.
It's coming from the universe itself.
Yes. Yes.
I could keep going for hours here, but I'm going to have to let you go. Debashish, this was wonderful. And you teach classes on Aurobindo at the CIIS. Is that that's the case?
Yes, I do, Duff. In fact, this very semester, I'm teaching 2 courses, one on the Upanishads and one on the integral yoga psychology of Sri Aurobindo.
And what is your website so people can check that out if they want?
Yes, I have a personal website. It's debashishbanerji.com. They can see a lot of my writings, my videos, etc. are all archived there. And my books are all mentioned there with links. So people are welcome to look at
it. And listeners, I've read 2 of them. I'm just getting started. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a thrill, and I can't thank you enough for illuminating us with all this stuff.
Thanks, Duff. It was a real pleasure.
Cheers. So, listeners, before I let you go, that was a long episode, a full hour. It occurred to me that I couldn't leave you after talking about spiritual insights of Sri Aurobindo without talking to the sage of sages, Joel Moss. What would Joey do? Hey, Joey.
Hey, Duff. Happy to be here.
So you weren't listening to that, so we can't really ask you to comment on that conversation, and you haven't met Debashish either. But I thought I would ask you, what, from your perspective, in the many hours that I have made you listen to me reading Aurobindo out loud to you, what he seems to have mean or to have done to me?
Yeah, he definitely grabbed hold of you. He tickles your soul, I think, is the expression we would use. And you light up like when you're reading him, and it's like it sort of makes you glow. And you found the person that speaks to you and brings all of the meaning into focus.
And now I have sort of doubled down on that because, as I said, I've read 2 of Debashish's books about Aurobindo, and I've read other books about him, not by him. And if you can summarize from your own perspective, I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but what's your main takeaway from all that I've read about him to you?
It's like he explains the entire universe, and you actually made it really accessible for me because I had tried to read a little before, and I would get, he can write a very long sentence, and I would get in and sort of drift off mid-sentence. And for whatever reason, once you started reading it out loud to me, it sort of clicked so that I could understand the pace and so that I can read it and understand it and absorb it. And he really does, if you're on a spiritual path and you're looking for God and looking to touch your soul and touch the soul of the universe, he explains step by step how that can unfold for you. Like, it's really remarkable.
So don't just take my word for it, people, or Debashish's. Take the word of Joel Moss as well. If you pick up something by him and it doesn't click, try reading it out loud because it works for me. And thank you, Joey, for joining us. We'll see you again next week.
Thank you, Duff.
Thank you, listeners, for enduring that. Hope you found it enjoyable. We'll be back with you in a week.
At the present moment, traveling town to town, the mystery of the motion, right here, right now, right here, right now, whoa, right here, right now.
You've been listening to How to Tickle Yourself with your hosts Duff McDonald and Matt McButter. You can help us by liking, subscribing, and sharing this podcast with others. You can talk to us and see what else is happening on Instagram and Facebook at How to Tickle Yourself. This program was recorded in Studio B of the historic Rockledge Recording Studio and the Tunnel under Arundel. Right Here, Right Now, our original 16-part theme music was written and recorded by the legendary Paul Reddick and Kyle Ferguson of the Sidemen, with the brilliant Steve Mariner on bass and drums and in the mixing room. The podcast is produced and distributed by Storic Media. Our editor is Andrew Steiner. Our coordinator is Samantha Abramovitz. Our producers are Kristen Verbitsky and Chuck LaBella. For more information, visit storicmedia.com. That's STORIC media.com.
My love, my dear, oh, everything's connected.